Hi, everyone. Welcome to Both Sides of the Story. I'm your host, Alan Janae from CBS 4. Thanks for joining us. Our special high school debate series returns tonight for a special fall election season tournament. And we've expanded the tournament to include even more high schools from throughout Colorado. Both of the students tonight have prepared a pro and con case for tonight's debate topic. They won't know which side they're on until we decide with a coin flip right here in our studio. This is the first round of our fall election tournament. The winner of this debate will move on to our semifinal rounds in October. On tonight's show, students from Cherry Creek High School's award-winning speech and debate team. So let's meet our participants. First up is Shrusti Manikandan. Shrusti is a senior at Cherry Creek High School and actively competes in extemporaneous speaking. Outside of debate, she is co-president of Cherry Creek's National Honor Society and is very passionate about tutoring children in her community. She has also learned classical dance for 11 years. Next is Nick Woodman. Nick is a senior at Cherry Creek High. He is captain of the debate team and has competed successfully at the national level. Nick also has won numerous chess tournaments and shares his love of that game through a program he founded, and he helps teach chess to elementary school kids. And joining us tonight is our special panel of experts who will offer their analysis of the debate today. They are Dominic Dezzutti, host of Colorado Decides, the election debate series produced in conjunction with CBS 4. Next to him is Ed Sealover, award-winning reporter with the Denver Business Journal. All right, it is time to set the ground rules tonight. Each side will present their case. They'll ask each other questions and have a chance to offer rebuttals. When it's finished, we'll go to our illustrious panel for their own questions, and we'll find out whom they felt offered the best arguments. So let's get started right now. The issue up for debate today is this: should the Rocky Flats Wildlife Refuge be open to the public as recreational space? We're going to have our coin flip right now and get underway. Shrusti, I'm going to have you call it because you're on my right. What do you pick?
Heads.
You pick heads. That means you go first. What would you like, pro or con?
I'll take the pro.
You'll take the pro, the affirmative. Shrusti, you begin right now, and let's get you started with your 3 minutes. Go ahead.
I stand in firm affirmation that the Rocky Flats Wildlife Refuge should be open to the public as recreational space. Today, I will demonstrate why we should allow Rocky Flats to be open to the public for two key reasons. The first reason is that Rocky Flats has been proven to be a safe area for the public. Despite the location's history of being used as a nuclear weapons production facility during the Cold War, the Colorado Department of Public Health, along with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, declared the land safe for unrestricted use following a $7 billion cleanup project that ended in 2005. Furthermore, a study done by the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment in 2016 found that there was no evidence of higher than expected frequencies of plutonium radiation cancers in the Rocky Flats vicinity. For greater reassurance, the federal conservation plan that would convert Rocky Flats into a refuge would prohibit people from entering the area where there are relatively higher plutonium concentrations. The second main reason why the Rocky Flats Wildlife Refuge should be open to the public is because it would benefit the Denver metro area greatly. Rocky Flats is home to 239 species of mammals, reptiles, and fish, alongside 630 plant species, all of which are in healthy condition. Allowing the public to observe the wildlife would not only serve as an educational experience, but it would also raise awareness of the numerous animals and plants that are unique to Rocky Flats. Moreover, in the plan to open Rocky Flats for recreational use, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service outlined several parking areas, multi-use buildings, and road alignments that will need to be built in the upcoming months. With more infrastructure projects in place, the Denver metro area will see an increase in economic growth due to higher employment, more productivity, and more economic activity from tourism. Next, let's take a quick look at one of the main points that opponents of this resolution usually bring up, which is that there's no way to ensure that people exposed to radiation won't develop health effects many years later. This point, however, can be invalidated using studies from the National Cancer Institute. The National Cancer Institute followed 13,000 people exposed to plutonium radiation from the Chernobyl accident starting in the 1990s. This result of the study established that nearly all of the people who experienced a plutonium radiation-related cancer acquired it within 9 years of exposure. In the context of the Rocky Flats, the 2016 study done by the Colorado Department of Public Health was done 11 years after the 2005 cleanup, and there was no link between cancer rates in neighboring communities and radiation from Rocky Flats. As I've shown you today, opening the Rocky Flats Wildlife Refuge for recreational use is not only entirely safe for the public, but it will also benefit the Denver metro area tremendously. And because of these reasons, I am proud to affirm the resolution.
Shrusti, thank you very much. Of course, the question today, should Rocky Flats Wildlife Refuge be open to the public as recreational space? Nick, you now have 2 minutes for questions and cross-examination. Go right ahead.
All right, so first and foremost, let's talk about national forests in Colorado. Currently, the government is in possession of 14.5 million acres of national forest and refuge land. Why must we open Rocky Flats?
So there are a few reasons. The biggest reason is that there are many species that are unique to Rocky Flats. For example, the Preble's jumping mouse is on the endangered species list, and it's rarely found in any areas around the U.S. except for the Rocky Flats. So first, this would be an educational experience in terms of the environment. Second, the Rocky Flats has so much historical value in terms of the role it played in the Cold War, so that would also serve in an educational basis.
All right. Also, how does increasing human activity, specifically just traffic in general, how does that affect the ecosystems in Rocky Flats?
So the Rocky Flats will obviously have a lot of restrictions and regulations in terms of how they're going to involve traffic and allow people to come on their area. And so the main purpose of this is that by allowing people to interact with the Rocky Flats area, they will be able to see a lot of the wildlife and animals and plants, but the overall effect that they're going to have on this is negligible, which is the reason the Colorado government is pushing for Rocky Flats to be opened.
All right. Also, a major part of your second argument is talking about infrastructure and how that increases commercial activity. How much does this infrastructure construction cost? Does that outweigh benefit of economic activity?
So I don't have the exact number of how much this will cost, but this is more than commercial use of the infrastructure. What we're looking at here is by building so many parking areas, multi-use buildings, and things as such, we're going to have an increase in employment from a lot of people in the Denver metro area. And moreover, by building up this area, it's going to attract a lot of tourism because the Rocky Flats has so many different species. So this, because of the infrastructure and the better use of the Rocky Flats, there's simply going to be better economic efficiency and growth.
Alrighty. And also, on terms of your radiation exposure point, your argument is comparing studies done based on Chernobyl and basically how that results in a 9-year contraction of cancer. Can you comment upon the difference in concentration of nuclear material at Chernobyl and at Rocky Flats?
So the study that I referred to is not making Rocky Flats and Chernobyl an apples to apples comparison. What it's stating is that in Chernobyl, there was a lot of plutonium-based radiation and people acquired cancers within 9 years. And similarly in Rocky Flats, there was plutonium radiation from the issues with the nuclear weapons. And because of that, we can see that comparison that people have not been acquiring cancer since the study was done in 2005.
All right, Nick, Shrusti, thank you very much. Nick, now you have 3 minutes for your case in opposition. Go right ahead.
Alrighty. The overwhelming reason why Rocky Flats should remain closed is public safety. It is indisputable that Rocky Flats was a weapons facility which utilized radioactive materials, including uranium and plutonium, to produce parts for nearly 70,000 nuclear weapons. It is because of this that the government spent $7.7 billion to clean up the area through a Superfund. However, the cleanup was not nearly adequate enough to make the area safe for recreational use. The Denver Post writes in May of 2018 that the government used a negotiated cleanup standard of 50 picocuries per gram of dirt to guide soil cleanup inside a 1,300-acre core area that remains fenced. Beyond that area, where refuge trails would bring hikers, horse riders, and cyclists, no soil cleanup was done. The Denver Post writes in another article published in May of 2018 that radiation control technician John Barton, who worked for the Department of Energy at the site from 1982 to 2003, told of a fire that spread plutonium particles throughout the property. And he testified that a 55-gallon waste barrel was found on the refuge in a clay mine pond, which was not covered by the Superfund cleanup, which contained plutonium. Mark Johnson, Public Health Director of Jefferson County, explains that the plutonium at Rocky Flats is in the dust particles. And the Denver Post explained in July of 2018 that if there are high levels of contamination on those trails, hikers bring that dirt and dust and mud off the refuge, and it goes wherever they go. Streets, shops, schools, even into your own home. The Huffington Post in July of 2017 explains that inhaling just one particle of plutonium will bombard internal organs, particularly the lungs and liver, with harmful alpha radiation for decades. This has been observed, for example, in the case of Elizabeth Panzer, who lives in the residential area outside of Rocky Flats and whose neighbor died in his 50s of heart cancer, the same type of cancer her son has been diagnosed with. Despite this, the government has declared that the park is safe for recreational use based on soil tests conducted post-cleanup. However, these tests have proven to be fundamentally flawed. First, the methodology of these tests were unsound. Look to the Denver Post this past July, which writes that state and federal agencies relied on plutonium concentrations in soil taken from 3 inches underground. They did not measure plutonium in surface dirt, where plutonium is most prevalent. Second, the tests failed to provide an accurate representation of the radioactivity of the park as a whole. Yet again, look to the Denver Post in July, which explains that soil testing encompasses less than 4 acres of land. In other words, 0.0006% of the total land of Rocky Flats. It would be preposterous to extrapolate from the results of these small parcels at the outer periphery of the refuge to the entire refuge. The refuge is vast in size and heterogeneous in terms of the distribution of the contaminants. Third, the government has demonstrated a clear lack of transparency regarding Rocky Flats. In 1989, the FBI conducted a raid of the facility, which led to criminal proceedings and an eventual plea deal convicting the administrators of the facility on environmental crimes, including 5 felonies, 5 misdemeanors, and an $18.5 million fine. Westward writes in August of 2009 that grand jurors, outraged by the deal, wrote a report outlining how justice had been denied and asked the judge to release it. Instead, he signed off on the settlement and ordered the report sealed. Only in 1993 was a redacted version of the report released. Those records, according to Fox Denver, are still sealed today. At the point where the government refuses to be entirely forthcoming with the American citizens regarding a serious health hazard that affects us all, its opinion on the matter as well as its testing should be considered inherently suspect. Due to the fact that radiation is yet to be contained in the refuge and is a matter of public health, Rocky Flats should remain closed.
Nick, thank you very much. All right, Shrusti, you now have 2 minutes for questions to Nick. Go ahead.
So, Nick, you bring up a lot of great points. So let's start with your first one, which says that the overall requirement that federal officials made for cleaning up Rocky Flats was at 50 picocuries. But do you know how many picocuries actually exist in the Rocky Flats right now?
Okay, so there's a few problems with that. First of all, your question is inherently not one I can really answer because picocuries vary depending on area. The government themselves only tested in certain areas, specifically 4 acres. The other issue with this is actually, thank you for bringing this up, 50 picocuries is actually higher of a standard than any other standard for any other national park. The government allows Rocky Flats to be open based on a higher standard. This is a double standard in the government, specifically regarding all national parks, which proves again government transparency here is lacking.
Okay. Moving on, you say that by inhaling 1 plutonium particle, then that will result in a lot of cancers and disease and things as such. But as I showed to you in my case, there have been rarely any instances of people acquiring disease based on plutonium radiation since the cleanup was done in 2005. So what evidence do you have to show that these dust particles from the plutonium are actually affecting people's health?
So I gave you the example of Elizabeth Panzer, whose neighbor died of heart cancer and her son has been diagnosed with the exact same form of cancer. The bottom line here is that we can actually see there is a correlation between plutonium and cancer. Your example trying to negate that was basically talking about Chernobyl and a study conducted there. Yet you admit to me in Crossfire that this is not even an apples-to-apples comparison. The concentration of Chernobyl was much higher, and like I show you in my Huffington Post evidence, it takes decades for these effects to occur. The bottom line here is that it's not safe for people regarding in the residential area as well as those who would be traversing through the park.
Okay, and in your third point, you talk about how there's not enough government transparency, and the FBI showed in 1993 that the government essentially has not lived up to standards. But 1993 was many years before the 2005 cleanup. So how does that evidence even, how is that valid to what we're talking about?
Okay, so there are a few different issues here. First is, again, we're showing the government hasn't been transparent with testing and has had flawed methodology in the status quo. That's right now happening today. But furthermore, the entire argument here as a whole is just explaining that we should not be trusting government testing, specifically regarding radiation at Rocky Flats. They have a history of being a little bit skirtish with us, and the bottom line here is you should not be taking their word as facts in today's round.
What reason would the government have to lie to you about both the federal government and the Colorado state government? Why would they lie about the safety of a place knowing that they could potentially face financial repercussions and other practical repercussions?
To cover up the crimes that were committed at the facility. I gave you 5 felonies and 5 misdemeanors as an example.
All right, we'll have to wrap up the questions right there. But Shrusti, you now have 2 minutes to give a rebuttal to Nick. So go ahead.
So let's go through Nick's case and see why many of his points simply are not valid in many reasons. So starting off with his first point about public safety, he talked about how the government essentially set a higher standard for Rocky Flats and said that the level of contamination of plutonium has to be under 50 picocuries. And now, while that is a higher standard, we can see that according to the Denver Post, it was revealed that even though the standard was set, thousands of soil tests conducted after 1991 through 2005 have shown that plutonium levels have not exceeded 20 picocuries. So clearly seeing that even though these standards were set high, the fact is that plutonium radiation is at 20, meaning that that point is really not very relevant to today's debate. Also, moving on to Nick's point about how one plutonium particle can result in a lot of cancers, disease, and other health effects. Although the story that Nick mentioned is truly heartbreaking to see that someone in our local community is facing such harsh repercussions, we have to realize that certain cancers cannot immediately be attributed towards plutonium radiation. Nick did not provide any evidence that that specific case that he mentioned acquired cancer because of the plutonium radiation in that area. In fact, we can see that in the study that I've shown, as well as another study done by the Colorado Department of Health and Environment, they've shown that the effects of radiation and the local levels of cancers have no effect. In fact, we can put this into perspective where the Denver Post further reports that the radiation that one actually absorbs from the Rocky Flats area is equivalent to eating 14 bananas a year. The same radiation that you would have from eating an average of 14 bananas a year is the same radiation you acquire from being near Rocky Flats. So this is something that's negligible, and it's something that you're acquiring on a daily basis regardless of if you're visiting the Rocky Flats or not. Moreover, we can go to his methodology point where he says that the government did not take adequate samples, but we can see that thousands of soil tests occurred after the 2005 cleanup, and there are approximately 7,230 surface soil samples, 15,890 subsurface soil samples, as well as thousands of air and water samples to produce millions of data points. I'm not sure why the government would have to lie about this, seeing that they would face so many financial repercussions and lawsuits and things as such. And for these reasons, we can see why many of these points are not relevant to today's debate.
Trusty, thank you very much. Nick, you now have 3 minutes to respond and close. Go ahead.
So in today's round, it is the affirmative's burden to prove to you that we must open Rocky Flats, and if I can prove to you that there is even a minimal harm, you should be voting for the negation in today's round. With that, let's move on to her case. Her first argument is all about how radioactivity has been controlled, is entirely safe. But she only uses government testing examples, and I have proven to you in my case that those are flawed. She tries to tell you that there are thousands of them and therefore they are okay, but she doesn't respond to the fact that these tests were only conducted on less than 4 acres of land. That's 0.0006% of the total land at Rocky Flats. These tests are not even near conclusive, and I've also proven to you that these tests do not test the surface dust in which plutonium is most prevalent. That's what the head of Jefferson County Public Health tells you. Next, move on to our metro area benefits claim. The bottom line here is the diversity of the ecosystem and commercial activity it would bring does not outweigh the severe health effects that would come with it. Because, as I point out to you in Crossfire, you would see a severe increase in human traffic throughout the entire park if you were to open it up for recreational area space. Go back to my evidence, which tells you that that means you're tracking plutonium all throughout the town into homes, which has adverse health effects for everyone. This is a severe public health issue. Next, you're going to move on to her point telling you that there's no way to ensure that cancer is caused by plutonium. Again, she's admitted to you that this study that she uses about Chernobyl is not topical for today's round and should not be applied. The bottom line is it's an apples to oranges comparison, not apples to apples. You should be throwing it out of the round. Next, move on to my case in which she tries to tell you I'm being some conspiracy theorist in which I'm saying the government lacks transparency. The bottom line is when the government starts stealing records regarding an issue and has been proven to be faulty in its testing, there is a severe lack of transparency which inherently harms public relations and makes all of their testing inherently suspect. She tries to tell you that there are thousands of soil tests done and 20 picocuries is the limit and it's been contained. Again, that's not the case. That's only in 4 acres of land. She tries to tell you that the government would face severe economic repercussions and therefore they would would never do this. But again, I've proven to you that they have faced severe economic repercussions. The bottom line here is those 5 misdemeanors, 5 felonies, and $18.5 million is proof of the fact that the government is guilty of being skirtish, specifically around Rocky Flats, and proves you should not be taking their word for this. At that point, what that proves to you is that you cannot be sure that radioactivity has been contained in Rocky Flats. In fact, it's still rampant. Look to the actual workers on the site who explained to you that plutonium has not been contained, who explained to you that plutonium's in the dust and it's being spread. She tries to tell you, I can't prove to you that cancer was caused by the plutonium dust, but Elizabeth Panzer herself tells you that mass construction that occurred around the flats and around the residential area whipped up plutonium-infested dust, which in turn led to the cancer. The bottom line here is that plutonium has been proven time and time again to have adverse health effects. The bottom line is that radioactivity has not been contained in Rocky Flats, and the bottom line is there is simply no benefit that would outweigh the lives of the public. At that point, there is no choice but to leave Rocky Flats closed.
Nick, thank you very much. Finally, Shrusty, your 1-minute close. Go ahead.
Today's debate really comes down to whether Rocky Flats is safe or not, and my opponent says that I have to prove to you whether Rocky Flats is completely safe, and I have done that. For one, starting with many of his rebuttals, we can see that first my opponent says that I only use government-tested data. Well, my opponent really didn't put out any third-party data either. He uses a lot of personal accounts, which are meaningful, but they do not suffice for this debate. Additionally, my opponent talks about how there's going to be a lot of traffic and a lot of issues in regards to that. Well, these parking areas are going to be far away from the actual refuge, meaning that people are going to be attracted towards this area, which would lead to economic growth, and they would actually be able to gain a lot of educational benefits, which my opponent really did not touch on. Additionally, my opponent talks about a lot of evidence from the 70s and the 80s where it shows that there was plutonium radiation, and I agree. Before the 2005 cleanup, there was a lot of